The Effects of Violent Video Games on Youth by Gilfillan and Gretchen Gottschalk. The phrase, everything in moderation, has been generalized over time. Years ago, it applied to how much food you ate and how much time you spent in the sun. Nowadays, it refers greatly to technology. As a child, I grew up with 3 older brothers who were constantly playing their Xbox. As someone who never had any interest in this form of fantasy world, I was able to see firsthand the effects that it had on my siblings, showing that they were unable to recognize when they had had enough. When a young child grows up in a world where violence is frequent, it can affect the development of their body and personality. Growing up thinking that the proper way to solve conflict is to always resort to violence will have a poor outcome on the conscience of the child. If a child is never taught that there are other solutions to a problem other than physical confrontation, they will not be able to understand that it is not socially acceptable to react in ways that they have learned are necessary for positive results. A child that is raised with frequent violent visuals become immune to emotion. With the amount of time the average youth spends on electronic gaming devices, it is not surprising that video games can have a similar effect on the behavior of the children who are exposed to such scenarios. While some people believe that violent video games can improve adolescents' reaction and creative problem-solving skills, this improvement does not outweigh the negative side effects.
With every year, new and improved technology has developed. Along with that technology, the growth of the video game industry has skyrocketed. More video games are flying off the shelves, with the majority of them including violence. Many hold the belief in which these violent video games are the pinnacle of teen aggression and violence. The current generation has grown up in a world only where electronics exist, and the expanding influence of video games on youth has yet to halt. For any 16-year-old girl, playing violent video games is uncommon, but not for me. Although I have experienced the vast majority of video games, every single game I own includes at least one form of violence, if not many. Have they caused me to feel aggravated and commit serious crimes against others? No. Violent video games never will cause me to express aggression towards others. Despite the belief many people hold, violent video games do not cause children and adolescents to outwardly express aggression toward others.
Having a constant stream of violence in the home will teach young-minded people that violence is normality in life and that it is accepted in other aspects of society. It will teach them to block out the emotions that come when they commit violent actions on another person, whether they be real or fictional. Violent video games are an example of violent behavior that is being taught to adolescents through media and repetitive action. The difference between violent video games and other forms of violent media, according to the Impact of Violent Video Games, an overview, is that video games are much more repetitive and often have repetition of complete behavioral sequences, making them ideal for learning aggressive attitudes. Video games are used in training astronauts and pilots in order to simulate real flight activity when teaching maneuvers and situational responses. This turns video games not only into an entertainment device, but a teaching method as well. When adolescents come to the time of their lives when they are searching for themselves, many will connect with people or characters that are consistent in their social activities. The Impact of Violent Video Games, an overview, states that the chances of a gamer adopting the aggressive behaviors and attitudes of a character have been shown to increase when they feel emotionally connected to them. When adolescents feel that they can relate to the character in their video game, it will cause them to believe that repeating the same behaviors will have similar results in their own lives. With video games becoming increasingly realistic in recent years, the main character, who is usually portrayed as a hero, becomes a realistic person the gamer can learn from and imitate. When children grow up having a violent parental figure in their life, they tend to repeat the same behaviors they experienced in their future lives out of habit. The same can be said when a gamer spends exceeding hours playing a game with an adult, violent character who they become attached to. A child exposed to large amounts of violence in their home life in either of these ways is affected psychologically.
Children are subject to other possibilities of violence at home. Violent video games often become the scapegoat for aggression that stems from a child's home. The media is known to exaggerate certain events and tend to do so with the spreading of video games. This circulation of games is due to the exposure from the media and not the games themselves. Simple simulators are created to benefit the user and to educate. If any violence is involved, it does so in correctly preparing the user for real-life situations and how to deal with those issues. If a child sees a behavior, they will often replicate it, whether it is violent or not. So, children will imitate almost anything if you condition them to do so. Yet, violent video games do not instill these behaviors. Children tend to copy actions that are not held within the screen. Throughout the stages of childhood and adolescence, people are creating a sense of self and begin to determine the separation between reality and fantasy. Although kids and teens feel they need to fit in, the fantasy is known and can be set apart from the real world. I know when I am playing a violent video game that I cannot run into a crowd and begin slicing up people with a sword. It is understood that some actions in those games cannot and should not be applied outside, even if it is acceptable in the game. According to Procon, if the violent parent is to blame for a child's harsh behavior towards others, it is not the fault of violent video games. Again, a child is more likely to replicate actions they witness in reality than in a fantasy world.
If children do not understand that other options exist, then violence in reaction to something negative, they will not be able to resolve conflict in more reasonable ways and will constantly create drastic measures for simple solutions.
I have experienced countless games which offered positive and negative consequences after a decision was made. This affected my decision, which forced me to think about the outcome. All students are educated in school. Not all violent video games require a lesson teaching system, and they are not needed because kids are taught what is wrong and right by attending school, watching others, and experiencing life. Violent video games and their effects they might have on kids are only a small fraction in their lives. As children, they are educated by the world and people around them, and consequences are engendered daily. If a child were to have an innate moral compass, psychological issues are affecting the person more than the violent video games. The games could bring forth and possibly bring out those qualities in a person, but those factors would already need to be present to be prevalent, which is shown in numerous studies. According to the New York Times, a study was conducted to test if violent video games create aggression. The results stated yes. However, the variables were unrelated to the circumstances. A few students tested were fed hot sauce before playing, which had no part in video game playing. After playing, students who were fed hot sauce showed a higher rate of aggression than those who were not. This tainted the credibility in the experiment, and the question still has yet to be proven right or wrong. Children might have aggressive thoughts at times, but playing violent video games does not cause me to think about wanting to conduct a school shooting. In fact, a 2004 U.S. Secret Service review of previous school-based attacks discovered 1/8 of people showed an interest in violent video games, with the shooters revealing less interest in violent video games and more in aggressive movies and books.
It is becoming more and more common among gamers to become addicted to their gaming habits, causing negative effects in their social lives and health. Although I can agree with Rose that many studies done are extremely skewed when results are picked from the whole to fit their controlled outcome. Video game addiction is a serious condition being considered for the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. The difference between video game addiction and other mental disorders is that it is not considered a threat to society, just as many disorders were not considered serious or deadly 50 years ago. If it does not affect people personally in their own lives, then they are likely to ignore it and not recognize it as a serious issue. Unlike other mental disorders, video game addiction is not as likely to be shunned by society as being. Video game addiction should be cautioned and well known in society, because if it grows out of hand without attention, then the difficulties it could cause might be too great to contain. 8.5% of U.S. gamers between the ages 8 and 18 years old play video games on a pathological level, meaning they play compulsively. With this number rising, if action is not taken against this problem, there might be serious consequences to the health and economic worth of our generation. If our generation is not educated and physically capable of the tasks that will be asked of it, they will be unable to withhold our society's standards. Although spending money on such items may be beneficial for the technology market, it may be detrimental to the rest of the economy when money is being borrowed from essential markets such as agriculture, housing, and industry. When gamers prevent proper funding to aid the flow of wealth, they are potentially damaging long-term economic safety. This brings us back to the generation's economic worth. If they are possibly detrimental to our economy, their worth drops immediately.
Violent video games serve as an outlet for many, including myself, to get away from reality and experience a different world. As reported by Procon, a 2007 study reported 45% of boys who played violent video games played because it helped them get their anger out. Through personal experience, I have multiple violent video games that have negative consequences if I take a harsh and unethical action. While playing, if I were to commit a crime, the police would arrest and then find my character. This occurs in GTA 5, possibly the most criticized game containing violence. Procon has also noted that since video game popularity has grown, the arrest rate for juvenile murders has fallen 71.9% between 1995 and 2008. The arrest rate has also declined by 49.3%. No threat is prevalent in crimes or arrests. One might think that violent video games are the cause of violence, but the data proves otherwise. Seclusion does not cause one to outwardly act violent. It does the opposite. According to a study conducted in 2007, 62% of boys play video games because it helps them relax. Violent video games are a useful investment of time. They provide a safe and healthy outlet for kids who also learn valuable information such as events about war, conflicts, death, and how to deal with or resolve those issues in reality. Research shows that a perception of being in control reduced emotional and stressful response to events overall. In 2005, statistics showed that the adolescent crime and murder rates have decreased while violent video game sales have rapidly increased. So, if a child were to develop other issues, acting violently is unlikely in any case if it were related to the effect the video games had.
Studies show that playing video games has a negative effect on gamers' educational results that can cause a drop in self-esteem. A study of 1,491 youth between the ages of 10 and 19 shows that those who played video games spent 30% less time reading and 34%. Such stress can cause violent outbursts and will put exceeding pressure on students to succeed. The student may avoid going to school altogether so that they will not have to face what they know they might not be successful in. Youth who don't succeed become frustrated, causing anger to take hold of their emotions. Students who game more tend to do poorly in school but feel a sense of mastery when they play video games. According to No Bullying, 60% of high school students who are reported of having difficulties with their teachers play video games on a regular basis. Students feel as if they may not be superior in school, but they excel in their electronic lives, meaning they feel they should be given more respect.
According to Healthline, violent video games can promote behaviors that benefit the child in school, which can increase focus and boost creative problem-solving skills. As reported by New York Times, studies do not account for outside factors, such as family situations or mood problems. These other factors can void any credibility of studies done, such as a study conducted by Iowa State University. Hot sauce was fed to the gamers before they played, which caused the aggression in their behavior, but it was not the cause of the game itself. Also, the New York Times has discovered that violence rates are seasonal, linking to the release of games. Yet, the adolescent crime rate fell more than half between 1994 and 2010 to 224 per 100,000. Just as Public Psych has reported, studies that have analyzed video games do not cause children and adolescents to become violent. It simply depends on the content the game is teaching. According to 2004 study results from Procon, the frequent playing of a violent video game sustained over a month had no effect on the participants' level of aggression. Procon also reported none of the research establishes or suggests a causal link between minors playing violent video games and actual psychological or neurological harm. Plus, in 2001, a surgeon's report concluded that the strongest risk factors for school shootings centered on mental stability and the quality of home life, not media or video game influence. A possible solution is to have the adolescent play with friends. Playing a high-action rate game can make the experience more exciting than playing alone. Playing alone can be more challenging and therefore more frustrating. Plus, a game on an easier setting would be a lot more rewarding than a challenging setting.
All things are good in moderation. Whether a child's social capabilities are hindered or facilitated with the use of video games, a limit should be set. Much like many video streaming companies, a solution to long periods of gaming would be to have a time limit where a notification appears asking the gamer if they really wish to continue. Parents should also take a stand in their child's time management, encouraging them to spend more time on schoolwork and outside.